There are certain truths that wealth cannot bury, no matter how many generations attempt to seal them behind gilt frames and marble halls. I have served as estate manager for the Ashworth family for 23 years, and in all that time, I have maintained professional discretion about the peculiarities that inhabit their Connecticut manor. Yet what occurred yesterday evening has compelled me to break that silence, if only to preserve my own sanity. The portrait in question hangs in the main stairwell, commissioned in 1973 by the late Cornelius Ashworth. It depicts his daughter, Eleanor, at age 16, a girl with auburn hair and eyes the color of winter storms. The painting has remained untouched in its ornate frame for 50 years, witnessing the rise and fall of 3 family patriarchs, countless social gatherings, and the gradual decay of old money traditions. I have walked past that portrait twice daily for over 2 decades. I know every brushstroke, every shadow that plays across Eleanor's pale features. Her expression has always been one of distant melancholy, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the viewer's left shoulder, as if watching something approach from the gardens below.
Until yesterday.
Yesterday, when I climbed those familiar mahogany stairs to deliver the evening correspondence to Mr. Ashworth's study, Eleanor's painted eyes followed my ascent. Not only did they track my movement, but her expression had shifted entirely, from melancholic detachment to something approaching recognition, as if she had been waiting 50 years for me to finally notice her watching. The Ashworth family fortune was built on railroad investments and sealed through strategic marriages to European textile heiresses. Their Connecticut estate, Millbrook House, sprawls across 147 acres of manicured grounds, housing 4 generations of accumulated treasures and carefully guarded secrets. I was hired in 2001, shortly after young Eleanor Ashworth, the great niece of the portrait's subject, suffered what the family diplomatically termed a prolonged nervous episode. That first Eleanor, the girl in the painting, died in 1975 at age 18. Car accident, according to the obituary I discovered in the estate's private archives. Yet family staff who worked here during those years would lower their voices when discussing her fate, exchanging glances that suggested the truth was far more complex than printed records indicated. The portrait was commissioned just 2 years before her death, painted by Marcus Whitmore, a society artist known for capturing what critics called the melancholy of privilege. Whitmore insisted on painting Eleanor in the main stairwell rather than his studio, claiming the natural light was essential for proper rendering of her unusual eye color. The sessions lasted 6 weeks, during which time several staff members reported hearing conversations between artist and subject that continued long after Eleanor had departed the room. Whitmore died 3 months after completing the commission, found in his studio with no apparent cause of death. The painting was installed immediately, despite Mrs. Ashworth's initial reluctance to display it so prominently. "It watches everything," she reportedly told the head butler, though she never elaborated on what she meant by such an observation. The first indication that something had changed came during my morning rounds on Tuesday. I maintain a precise schedule: 7:15 for grounds inspection, 8:30 for interior security check, 9:45 for correspondence review. As I ascended the main staircase at exactly 8:32, carrying the day's agenda for Mr. Ashworth's approval, I felt an unusual sensation, the distinct impression of being observed. I paused at the landing, ostensibly to adjust the fresh lily arrangement Mrs. Henderson places there each morning. From my peripheral vision, I studied Eleanor's portrait. The painted figure remained exactly as I remembered, ivory dress with pearl buttons, hands folded in her lap, that familiar expression of distant sadness. Yet something felt fundamentally altered, though I couldn't identify what exactly had shifted. Later that afternoon, while escorting the estate's insurance appraiser through the house for the annual policy review, I noticed him lingering before the portrait with obvious discomfort. "A remarkable piece," he murmured, then added quietly, "though I could swear she's looking directly at me. Most portraits create that illusion, but this one—" He trailed off, making a note on his clipboard with hands that trembled slightly. That evening, I found myself taking an unusual route through the house, avoiding the main stairwell entirely. When Mr. Ashworth inquired about the delay in delivering his evening brandy, I fabricated an excuse about checking the heating system in the East Wing. I have never been given to superstition, yet I could not shake the feeling that Eleanor's painted gaze had somehow awakened, and that she disapproved of my 23 years of careful observation. Wednesday morning brought an unseasonable chill to the house, though the heating system registered normal temperatures throughout all zones. I discovered Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen at 6:45, an hour earlier than her usual arrival, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "I can't seem to get warm today," she said, avoiding my eyes as she prepared the morning tea service, especially near the main stairs. "Feels like standing in a draft, though I checked every window twice." I assured her I would investigate the matter, though privately I wondered if she too had noticed the change in Eleanor's portrait. "Mrs. Henderson has worked for the Ashworths for 31 years, longer than anyone currently employed. If the house held secrets, she would be among the few still living who might remember their origins. During my 9:45 correspondence review, I discovered an unusual addition to Mr. Ashworth's papers, a letter from a genealogy researcher requesting access to family archives regarding Eleanor Ashworth's death in 1975. The inquiry was dated 6 months earlier, yet this was the first I had seen of it. More disturbing was Mr. Ashworth's handwritten response, declining the request with unusual vehemence. "Some family matters are best left undisturbed. The portrait serves as sufficient memorial to Eleanor's memory." I had never heard Mr. Ashworth speak of his great-aunt Eleanor, nor had I ever seen any other images of her throughout the house. For a family that documented every significant event with photographs and formal portraits, her absence from the visual record seemed deliberately calculated, as if someone had methodically erased all traces of her existence except for that single watching image. Thursday afternoon brought the monthly visit from Dr. Patricia Henley, the family physician who has attended to Ashworth medical needs for 15 years. I was arranging fresh orchids in the main foyer when she arrived, and I observed her reaction as she climbed the staircase toward Mr. Ashworth's private study. She stopped abruptly at the portrait, her medical bag sliding from her shoulder to the floor with a muffled thump. For nearly 2 minutes, she stood perfectly still, studying Eleanor's painted features with the intensity of a diagnostician examining symptoms. When she finally continued up the stairs, her pace had quickened considerably. An hour later, as I escorted Dr. Henley to her vehicle, she paused at the front door. "Oh, that portrait," she said carefully. "Has Mr. Ashworth mentioned any changes to it recently? Any restoration work or modifications?" I assured her that the painting had remained untouched since its installation 50 years ago. She nodded slowly, then added, "The expression seems different somehow. More present. I've passed that portrait dozens of times over the years, and yesterday was the first time I felt as though she was truly seeing me." After Dr. Henley departed, I found myself standing in the foyer studying the staircase from a distance. Even from 30 feet away, Eleanor's gaze seemed to seek mine through the afternoon shadows. I realized that what had begun as a subtle unease was evolving into something approaching dread. The painted girl was no longer a static memorial to a long-dead family member. She was becoming an active presence within the house, watching and waiting for something I could not yet comprehend. Friday evening marked the breaking point of my composed professional facade. Mr. Ashworth had requested I retrieve a specific file from the estate's archive room, a basement space housing 70 years of family documents, photographs, and legal papers. The archive is accessed through a narrow staircase adjacent to the main hall, requiring me to pass directly beneath Eleanor's portrait. As I approached the staircase at 9:23, carrying the brass key to the archive room, I made the mistake of looking up at the painting. Eleanor's head had turned, not dramatically. The shift was subtle enough that someone unfamiliar with the portrait might not notice. But her face, which had gazed toward the gardens for 5 decades, now looked down the staircase directly at me. Her painted lips, previously set in a neutral expression, had curved into what could only be described as a knowing smile. More unsettling still, her eyes held an intelligence that seemed entirely separate from the artist's original creation. She was no longer a representation of a dead girl. She was the girl herself, somehow preserved and watching from within the confines of oil paint and canvas. I dropped the archive key, the brass clanging against the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the silent house. When I bent to retrieve it and looked up again, Eleanor's position had shifted once more. Her painted hand, previously folded demurely in her lap, now pointed toward the archive room below, as if directing me to discover whatever truth lay hidden in the family's carefully preserved records. The smile remained, patient and expectant, as though she had been waiting 50 years for someone to finally understand her silent communication. Despite every instinct urging me to flee, I descended into the archive room, Eleanor's painted gaze burning into my back with each step. The basement archive spans nearly the entire foundation of Millbrook House, its climate-controlled environment preserving decades of Ashworth family documentation. Steel shelves lined with leather-bound volumes stretch from floor to ceiling, organized by decade and family branch. I located the file Mr. Ashworth had requested, estate tax records from 1998, but found myself drawn to an older section marked Family Correspondence, 1970 to 1979. The binding was different here, darker leather that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the fluorescent lighting. Within minutes, I discovered a manila folder labeled simply Eleanor A. Personal Effects. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing photographs I had never seen displayed anywhere in the house. Eleanor at 14 laughing in the garden, Eleanor at 15 playing piano in the music room, and then abruptly the photograph stopped. The final image showed Eleanor at 16, the same pose and expression captured in the portrait upstairs, but this was clearly a reference photograph for the artist. On the back, someone had written in fading ink, "Final sitting, October 15th, 1973. Eleanor refuses to continue." Below that notation, in different handwriting, portrait completed posthumously from this photograph. Died October 20th. Circumstances remain unclear. The implications of that notation struck me like physical blows. Eleanor had died 5 days after her final sitting, not 2 years later as the official obituary claimed. More disturbing still was a series of police reports filed between October 20th and November 3rd, 1973, detailing unusual occurrences at Millbrook House. Officer Daniel Morrison documented strange sounds emanating from Eleanor's bedroom weeks after her death. Family reports hearing piano music from deceased girl's room at approximately 11:30 each evening. Room has been sealed since October 21st. No access possible. Another report, filed by Officer Sarah Chen on November 1st, described unexplained temperature fluctuations in the main stairwell where Eleanor's portrait was being installed. Residents claim specific area around painting remains consistently 20 degrees colder than surrounding spaces. No mechanical explanation discovered. The most chilling document was a statement from Marcus Whitmore, the portrait artist, given to police 3 days before his own death. "The painting is incomplete. Eleanor died before I could capture her eyes properly. I painted them from memory, but something else is looking through them now. The girl in the portrait is not the girl I knew. She is something that dwells in the space between completion and abandonment, between life and art." Whitmore had added a final note in shaky handwriting. "She wants to finish what we started." The portrait is her doorway back. A leather-bound journal hidden behind the police reports provided the missing pieces of Eleanor's story. The entries, written in her own hand, began 6 months before her death and chronicled a young woman increasingly isolated by her family's expectations and social pressures. "Father insists I marry Harrison Blackwell next spring," she wrote in April 1973. "He is twice my age and speaks to me as though I were a prize horse he is considering purchasing. Mother says duty to family supersedes personal happiness. I feel like a portrait already, beautiful, silent, and trapped within a frame of other people's making." The entries grew darker as summer progressed. Eleanor described feeling watched constantly and unable to escape the house without permission. More disturbing were her references to the other Eleanor, a presence she claimed to see in mirrors and reflective surfaces. "She looks exactly like me," Eleanor wrote in September, "but her expression is freer somehow, as though she possesses choices I have been denied. Sometimes I wonder if she is what I could become if I were brave enough to break free from Father's plans." The final entry, dated October 19th, one day before her death, consisted of a single line. "Tomorrow, I pose for the portrait one last time. Perhaps she and I can finally trade places." I discovered the true circumstances of Eleanor's death in a sealed envelope marked "Private Family Only," hidden between pages of a 1974 tax ledger. The contents included a coroner's report that differed drastically from the public obituary, along with a letter from Cornelius Ashworth to his attorney. According to the coroner, Eleanor died in her bedroom from undetermined causes, with no evidence of injury, illness, or foreign substances. However, the report noted unusual positioning of the deceased, found seated before her vanity mirror in a pose identical to that captured in the recently completed portrait downstairs. Cornelius's letter to his attorney revealed the family's desperate attempts to control the narrative. Eleanor's death occurred under circumstances that would generate unwanted speculation. The portrait sessions had become increasingly disturbing. She claimed the painting was stealing her life and begged us to destroy it. On the evening of October 20th, we found her dead in a position matching the portrait exactly, as though she had become the painting itself. The letter continued. "Marcus insists the portrait is responsible, claiming Eleanor's spirit became trapped within the oils during the final session. Such nonsense cannot be allowed to circulate. We have arranged for a car accident to be reported instead. The portrait will remain as memorial, though I suspect we are making a terrible mistake." As I read those final revelations, the archive room's temperature plummeted. My breath became visible in sudden clouds as frost began forming on the metal shelves around me. The fluorescent lights flickered in a pattern that seemed almost rhythmic. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short again. "Yes." I gathered the documents hastily, my fingers numb with cold that seemed to emanate from the papers themselves. As I climbed the narrow staircase back to the main floor, each step brought increasing warmth, as though I were emerging from some supernatural deep freeze. Eleanor's portrait awaited me at the top of the stairs, and the transformation was now undeniable. She no longer merely watched, she communicated. Her painted hand pointed not down toward the archive as before, but toward the east wing of the house, specifically toward what I knew was her childhood bedroom, sealed since her death 50 years ago. Her expression had changed again, displaying an urgency that transcended the static medium of oil paint. The knowing smile had been replaced by something approaching desperation, as though time was running out for whatever she needed to accomplish. For the first time since discovering the documents, I understood that Eleanor was not haunting the house. She was imprisoned within it, trapped in a painting that served as both memorial and jail. I climbed the stairs to Eleanor's bedroom with documents clutched against my chest, and her painted eyes following my every movement. The East Wing had been closed to staff since my employment began, accessible only to family members who never chose to visit it. The brass nameplate on her door had tarnished black with age, Eleanor Ashworth, Private. The key hung on a ribbon tied to the doorknob, as though someone expected this moment to arrive eventually. Inside, Eleanor's room remained exactly as she had left it 50 years ago. Sheet music scattered across the piano bench, books open to pages she would never finish reading, and her vanity mirror reflecting the doorway where I now stood. But it was the mirror that revealed the truth. In its surface, I saw not my own reflection but Eleanor herself, not painted but real, trapped within a silvered prison that connected to the portrait downstairs. She pressed her palms against the glass from within, her mouth forming words I could not hear but somehow understood. "Free me." The portrait had never been her memorial. It was her anchor, binding her spirit to this house, to this room, to an eternal existence serving her family's need for a perfect, silent daughter. She had found a way to communicate, to lead someone to the truth of her imprisonment. Now she was asking me to complete what Marcus Whitmore had unknowingly begun, to break the connection between painting and prison, and finally allow Eleanor Ashworth to rest.